Thank you all for joining me in this talk. Today, I'll discuss our work where we've been examining ways in which technology and technology designers could play a role in supporting vulnerable population. For the past 3 years, we've been working with an anti-trafficking organization in Nepal and trafficking survivors supported by the organization. Now, this particular work discusses our attempt in taking an asset-based approach to introduce technology to a group of trafficking survivors. Now, to differentiate from general survivors, I'll be referring to the survivors we worked with as sister survivors in this talk. First, I'll highlight the way in which we built upon our prior work where we had identified two elements of the sister survivors' strengths, namely their skills in making local handicrafts and their mutual bond with one another. Following that, I will discuss the design and introduction of a web application called Hamro Kala that attempted to build on those identified strengths. We introduced the web application through a 10-day workshop where we observed the sister survivors adapt and appropriate the technology to make it their own. Finally, I will discuss some of the implications of the work that we believe would be beneficial to members of HCI community, particularly those who work with vulnerable groups. In particular, I'll argue for a long-term commitment to community building while taking an asset-based approach and present 3 design principles that we believe could be beneficial in promoting communal spaces. Now, in Nepal's cases, trafficking survivors are vulnerable due to a myriad of reasons. They're young, typically between the age of 11 and 20. Most are uneducated. In fact, the national report from 2018 estimated that 85.9% of trafficking survivors have never been to school. Many survivors are shunned by their families and have very limited source of social support. One source of support that the survivors have are the anti-trafficking organization that provide them with some form of protected living home, some skill-based training and support during reintegration. Now, NGOs are the major actors in this context who've been supporting survivors in the reintegration process, throughout the reintegration process. Now, we have been working with one such NGO who we shall call SO in this talk. In our work, we've been taking an asset-based approach, which focuses on identifying the strengths that the population possesses and trying to build on it to make it more empowering. It stands in contrast to another quite popular approach that focuses on the needs and deficits, which is quite common in international development. Now, in literature, in community development literature, it is argued that deficit-focused approaches rob agency from actors who can bring about change, and it perpetuates dependency. In fact, the anti-trafficking organizations such as those that we work with in Nepal have been called to be part of the rescue industry for their role in perpetuating this need-based system. Asset-based approaches, on the other hand, focus on the strengths possessed by the community members. A part of that involves identifying the strengths that the community has, as we've done in our earlier study, and building upon it, which is what we're trying to do in this study. Asset-based approaches, as Alison Matthew argues, encourages power within, power to, and power with, and resists power over the community. Interest in asset-based approaches have been growing in HCI community as well, such as that in Cho et al.'s work with low-income Latino families in Southern California, and Karusala and Vishwanath et al.'s work in low-resource learning environment in Mumbai, India. The key here is to identify these strengths and seek ways to build upon it. Now, in our earlier ethnographic work, we tried to do that, where we had uncovered 2 elements of strengths possessed by the sister survivors. The first was their crafting skills. SO had provided training to all sister survivors to work on local handicrafts as part of their reintegration process. Now, the crafting skills have potential to generate income. However, there has been a decline in sale in the local market. But that knowledge of crafting could lead us to other skills that are more enduring. The second element of strength was their mutual bond, or the strong bond that we'd observed during the study. The shared living situation, the awareness of the past, and the work that they shared and support they provided each other had fostered strong bonds between the sister survivors. However, the sister survivors also noted that once they leave the shelter home, they may lose connection with one another, which again adds complexity to this particular strength. Also, during the study, we noticed that none of the sister survivors had access to computers or mobile phones. None of them were attending schools, and only 3 reported being comfortable enough to read a simple SMS text. The NGO had tried to introduce computers and Photoshop to a group of sister survivors earlier. They had found the introduction to be overwhelming, as we hear in S3's statement, who said that she'd never even touched a laptop before to know what to do with it when it was presented to her. The staff members too had imbibed the belief that the sister survivors would not be able to use computers. Now, as we seek to leverage technology to build on existing strengths, there are a significant number of HCI4D and ICTD work in the global South that inform ways in which we could do so. Moving beyond the techno-deterministic solutionism that was prominent before, there's a need for us to focus on the socio-political arrangements that influence the way technology is adapted, and appropriated. Work such as that by Sambasivan et al. And Kumar and Anderson highlight the prominence and value of shared and intermediated use. At the same time, there is restriction and danger associated with use, and in some cases, even with the possession of technology. Now, in this context, we're influenced by Sultana et al.'s argument for empowering vulnerable groups within the existing structure, rather than trying to dismantle the structure altogether. It is particularly relevant to our case where the population is already vulnerable and marginalized. Drastic steps could put them at position of greater danger from which we do not have the capabilities to protect them. So there is a need for us to take careful and small steps when moving forward. Now, having said that, I'll discuss our approach to build on the sister survivors' crafting skills and mutual bond. Aiming to introduce the sister survivors to computers, we developed a voice annotated web application called Hamro Kala, which translates to our crafts in Nepali. The web application was contextualized around crafting, allowing the sister survivors to draw sketches, post details of the crafts, look at other people's crafts, and post comments on those. We hypothesized that contextualizing the web application around crafting would help in introducing computers. It is worth noting here that the web application was hosted through a local server and was not connected to the internet. We did this because we had not provided any lessons or any mechanism for online safety. Now, all the elements in Hamrokala had voice annotation, which played whenever a user hovered over the element. The voice annotation played in a female voice with a familiar intonation. Moreover, the sister survivors had limited digital literacy. So phrases that are quite common in digital parlance, such as login and logout, which is also commonly used in Nepali websites, had little meaning to them. So we used elaborate phrases in the voice annotation. For example, instead of saying log out in Nepali, the web application said, to leave this technology, press here. In this way, we see voice not as an information source, but as a conversation with the users. Such as, if you could hear it, this is how it would sound. To build on the sister survivors' mutual bond, we added features that promoted social interaction. For example, in addition to posting crafts for sale, the sister survivors could share the crafts with their community members and receive comments on it. The application supported them to leave audio comments on the shared crafts as well. Similarly, drawings could be shared, copied, modified, and reshared with the community. Technology alone is not enough, though. The way it is introduced and how it is positioned is quite critical and requires careful consideration. To that end, we conducted a 10-day workshop for a group of 9 sister survivors to introduce computers and Hamrokala. Each session ran for around 2 hours. The first 2 days were used for general discussion, and computers were introduced on the 3rd day. We had 4 laptops with us, so it was shared between groups of 2s and 3. On the final day, each sister survivor explained Hamrokala to a staff member. This was done both to see how much the sister survivors understood about the web application and more critically to promote a sense of ownership over the web application. The data that we used in this analysis included field notes, use logs, and screen recordings from the final day presentation. Overall, we find that the sister survivors were able to use Hamrokala and create a large volume of digital artifact. We noticed that many stayed beyond the 2 hours to use the web application. On the final day, the staff members expressed astonishment with what the sister survivors were able to do with the computers. Now, being able to explain one web application is not a lot, but the staff members' astonishment reflects how low the bar had been set because of the prior failure in introducing computers. Again, I'd like to reiterate the value of careful introduction of technology because failure could lead to consequences such as eroding population's confidence and sense of capability. The sister survivors initially relied on the voice annotation to navigate. However, the use receded once they became familiar with the outlay of the website. They refer to the voice annotation at times, but just to remember what to do and rarely played the audio completely later on. Now, during the session, we noticed the sister survivors helping one another to use computers. In these cases, some explicitly asked for help, whereas others came to help without being asked for. The support was kind of similar to the support we'd noticed they provide each other during their crafting process. This seemed to facilitate computer use and make it a fun activity, as we hear in S2's comment, who said that with the sisters helping, computing was a fun and easy thing. Now, while showing it to the warden, I got scared and my hands shivered. Note that the mutual support helped in reducing the fear around technology. But as we heard in S2's account, the fear was not completely overcome. Beyond mutual support, the sister survivors seem to be enthralled in being able to share work with one another. Did it come was a commonly used phrase throughout the sessions to check that the drawing, craft, or comment could be seen by others. S9 Joy, as we can see here in this slide, was shared by other sister survivors as well. Of course, there are elements of novelty effect at play here, but the growing interest to learn computing and own their work suggests that there is more to it than novelty effect. One such thing that suggests that was that the sister survivors were actively negotiating what could be done in the space, such as the fact that nobody could like everything about the technology or establishing what could be said in the item description video. Having said that, not everything was about collective practices though. The sister survivors expressed the need for individual boundaries as well. This was most evident in their respect for others' drawings, where they refused to modify other people's drawings. It was not because they feared damaging the original art, but rather because they thought they would not be able to justify the original artist's intent. So although we talk about collective practices, there is also a need to respect individual boundaries within it. Furthermore, the context of crafting helped the sister survivors to understand Hamrokala's function. They attached various values such as using Hamrokala to sell their crafts or using Hamrokala to use it to inform others of their crafting process or practices. Moreover, because the web application was contextualized around crafting, it drew discussion on the sister survivors' crafting process, effort, and value. In the discussion, the sister survivors expressed having limited control over their crafts. The lack of control around crafting could be seen in the fact that none of the audio comments that they provided critiqued the craft, whereas all of the comments suggested ways to improve the video presentation that they had made. Now I'd like to move on to draw out some of the aspects of our work that I think could inform future work with vulnerable population. First, we strongly argue for an asset-based approach. Focusing on the strengths that the community possesses can help empower individuals within the structure. Having said that, focusing on assets alone may not solve the larger systemic issues that have resulted in the population's vulnerability in the first place. There is a need for long-term committed engagement that simultaneously addresses larger system issues. In our case, for example, the sister survivors had mentioned that they feel they have limited control over the crafting process. So in the follow-up study, we discussed this with the trainers who promised that they would seek ways to provide more control to the sister survivors. It is a small step, but it allows us to push back on the systemic issues and thereby support broader possibilities to build around the sister survivors' existing strengths. Second, technology can be a valuable tool. In our case, we believe that technology provided a safe space for experimentation where the sister survivors expressed and strengthened their bonds within a new context afforded by the technology. In other words, the workshop and accompanying technology provided a small room for the sister survivors to enact care for one another. This experience has also led us to argue the value of communality and mutual bond to foster technology acceptance and appropriation. We believe that the following three interdependent aspects of our work helped in promoting communality around technology. First, the voice annotation publicized what one was doing to the group. This made the activity perceptible, worked as an invitation for others to join in and help. Furthermore, the sister survivors' pre-existing mutual bond was beneficial. That coupled with the technological features made the activity engaging and fun. Second, not everyone will observe information equally. And so there is a need for us to create appropriable steps for the group. One way that worked for us was that because the sister survivors worked in groups and each task could be divided into smaller steps, some members of the group understood enough of its facets and had enough time to discuss and draw the knowledge together towards meaningful action. Creating these appropriable steps in the activity seemed to help the use, which contrasts with the feeling of overwhelming that they had reported when computers were introduced earlier. Finally, we argue that there is a need to build in fun choices in the socio-technical system, even when a focus on economic well-being might indicate a more restrictive approach. The web application was not only about posting items for sale. By promoting communal sharing of drawing, crafts, and comments, there was room for playfulness and choices. Now, while it may not translate to economic outcome, the playful experience was valuable and can facilitate adoption of the technology moving forward. One broad rule of thumb could be to think of designing technology for the population in a way that we ourselves would enjoy using it. Uh, I think that, thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry for running a little longer than 15 minutes here.